Hi, my name is Allison Barker, and this is my Contemporary Art History of Art and Architecture HIAA 880 final project. The goal of my final project was to explore the abstract expressionism of Jackson Pollock through the application of action painting. This video is a product of my exploration. The first step after my proposal of my final project was to begin getting the supplies. I first went to Utrecht on Wickenden Street in Providence, Rhode Island. There I acquired Aquabee craft paper roll 48 inches by 10 yards and some acrylic paint, which I ended up not using unfortunately. Then I went to Home Depot where I acquired 2 gallons of Oopsie's Bear House paint, 1 pint of white, and 3 wooden stir sticks. Later I searched my yard for sticks from the ground and gathered some plastic Tupperware to mix and paint in. Lastly, I considered Hans Namuth, at least I think that's how you pronounce his name, Jackson Pollock's 51, where he shot less than 20 minutes of Jackson Pollock painting. Without this video and Jackson Pollock's interview, I would not have been able to achieve this project of exploration. Jackson Pollock determined the, quote, new needs need new techniques, and that each age finds its own technique, end quote. He says, quote, it seems to me a natural growth out of a need, and from a need, the modern artist has found new ways of expressing the world about him. I paint on the floor, and this wasn't unusual. The Orientals did that, end quote. Most of the paint I use is a liquid flowing kind of paint. The brushes I use are used more as sticks rather than brushes. The brush doesn't touch the surface of the canvas, it's just above. It seems to be possible to control the flow of the paint. I don't use the accident, 'cause I deny the accident, end quote. Quote, I do have a general notion of what I'm about and what the result will be. They're an impractical size, but I enjoy working big, whether it's practical or not. I do step onto the canvas occasionally, end quote. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement. Painting, I think today, the more immediate, the more direct, the greater the possibility of making a direct and of making a statement. Pollock's words and Numuth's video were used as the parameters of my painting. Parameter number 1. Jackson Pollock created his technique due to the limitations of painting on a vertical plane. Therefore, he rotated his canvas to the horizontal plane, where he was able to use drip painting to create his works. Therefore, I will as well use this horizontal plane to create my works. Parameter number 2. Pollock used liquid flowing paint and non-traditional paintbrushes. Therefore, the paint I will use is house paint with varying degrees of watering it down to create the perfect flow. I will also be using stir sticks, wood, and pouring techniques to apply paint to the canvas. Parameter number 3. Pollock worked on large canvases that he could walk around and sometimes on. I will be using a 48-inch by 10-yard long canvas to create 3 separate pieces. Parameter number 4. Pollock worked on his technique until every gesture was intentional. I will also work on my technique so that my gestures are also intentional and non-accidental. Parameter number 5. Every piece of Pollock's was created as a statement and cohesive piece. I will strive to do so for my works. However, my goal is not to create a cohesive piece, but instead to explore the techniques of Pollock's. Therefore, this might not be accomplished. Before I show my footage, I would just like to make it very clear that I'm not making a Pollock. I don't actually believe anyone can make a Pollock besides Jackson Pollock, who unfortunately died in '56 in a car crash. Instead, I am using similar techniques of Pollock through action painting, which is a form Pollock made famous in the '40s, though other artists also used this style as well. I should also state that I'm not very good with video recording and had a lot of difficulties, especially with batteries and video recorders. I used 3 different types of devices of recording. The first was my small camera, which ran out of memory a lot. The second was my family's 1990s video recorder, which was not very reliable for battery power or for tape memory. And third was my iPhone, because on technique number 3, both my camera and tape recorder ran out of taping space. So you've been warned. I'm not making a Pollock, and I'm not a very good video recorder. Now to my actual applications of the techniques. I use 3 pieces to create my works. For technique 1, I focused on just working with the paint on a large canvas and the flow of the paint. I had worked previously on my techniques on a smaller canvas, however, I was not able to tape this. Therefore, I'm just going to be calling this Technique 1. The first thing I realized when working on a larger canvas was that I needed to carry the paint around with me. I couldn't just dip into the paint and then walk around with the stick. Pollock does this in his film clips as well. However, I didn't realize that he did this until I actually started working on a larger canvas. Also, this is the first time that I realized that Pollock must have had really amazing back muscles to bend over for that long period of time while carrying gallons of paint. Technique number 2. This piece, I focused on watering down my house paint. However, it was very difficult to get the right mixture for this. I really spent time trying to figure out the perfect mixture, but I wasn't able to in the end. This created a really nice effect, and in hindsight, I wish I had, in the end, created a final piece that used the techniques of 1, 2, and 3 all together, but I ran out of paper. Technique number 2 was really more splattering than drizzling, and it worked as a piece, but I felt like it needed more drizzle as well. Technique number 3. This was my final technique, and as you can see, I rolled out whatever I had left of my paper roll. It was during this paint session that I really started to understand what I was doing. Therefore, in that sense, I think every mark was not accidental. However, it was incredibly windy on that day, and I didn't have the protection of my mom's car like I did in the other 2 techniques. Therefore, some of my paint started to blow away from me, even though I intended it to be in a certain location and ended up in another location. But I decided to myself that this wasn't an accident, because Jackson Pollock said that he denied every accident, so I denied the accident, and instead just worked with what had occurred. One thing I really loved about technique number 3 was that I was working on Pembroke Green right near the stairs, which had a lot of movement and a lot of public accessibility. For number 1 and 2, I was working at home during Thanksgiving, and while I did have some neighbors ask me what I was doing, they didn't really understand who Pollock was or what I was doing or hadn't ever seen Pollock's works. When I was at Brown, though, I did receive some odd stares and people kind of glaring at me, but for the most part, when people were interested in the work and came up to talk to me about it, they understood who Pollock was and what his style of technique was, and so I was really able to talk to them about what I was doing, and it made working in public a lot easier. These are the final pieces of technique 1, 2, and 3. When you first look at them, they honestly all look the same. However, upon closer examination, number 1 has a lot of flow, and I worked on the flow of the piece and how the colors mixed together. However, I didn't spend a lot of time layering them. Number 3, however, I spent a lot of time layering all the flow that I did, and I really spent time working on creating lots of layers and lots of dynamics. Number 2, unlike number 1 and 3, was a lot more splattery because I watered it down, and to achieve flowing lines, I actually needed to pour out the paint from the container to achieve this look. These 4 images of 1 and 2 show closer detailing of the works. These two images are of technique number 3. I really liked the one on the right for the angle shot, and I think it really shows the thickness of the paint. These two images are details of number 3. I really liked the mixture and layers of this piece. These are 2 more details of number 3. These are 3 of my paintbrushes that I used. I really loved using sticks with the paint. They made for a very different line and flow pattern than the stir sticks. With stir sticks, it was a lot easier to grab the paint and to create really heavy lines, and it was a lot more difficult to do that on the sticks, but it also made me a lot more conscious of what I was doing when I was using the sticks. So in the end, I liked both. They both had different techniques, but I also really preferred the sticks. These 2 images are showing thickness of the paint. These are my final 2 images of technique number 3. For all 3 pieces, I didn't end up keeping the final work, mostly due to not having enough time for each of them to dry before rolling them up. I don't think I ever realized how long paint takes to dry, probably because I've never painted before. I've heard that oil paint takes a really long time, so I guess house paint also takes a long time. I also didn't keep either or any of these pieces because, as you can see on the left, for all the times that I worked on my works, it was really windy outside, and the wind carried my pieces, so the paint smudged a lot, and it didn't really come out how I wanted it to. And so I kind of tossed it out. But at the same time, when I was tossing it out, I kind of felt like de Kooning when Rauschenberg asked him for his favorite piece of work to erase. But I also liked that I threw it out because the only documentation I have of actually doing it is this video and are my images. So I thought that was very interesting. Overall, I really felt like I got a lot out of this exploration. And as for my parameters, I really think I kept to them. For number 1, I did only use a horizontal plane one time, however I accidentally taped over it. The joys of tapes. I tried drizzling it on a more vertical plane. Needless to say that it didn't work out so well, and I wasn't able to use the same techniques as I did on the horizontal plane. For number 2, I stuck to flowy paint and non-traditional paintbrushes. As you can see, I tried watering down the house paint, but for the most part, house paint is pretty flowy. And for non-traditional paintbrushes, I didn't even use any paintbrushes. I just used sticks, basically. For number 3, I worked on large canvases. However, I was really timid at first to step on the paper. I know Pollock doesn't really step on his canvas at all, but I was even more timid not to do so. But by piece number 3, with the wind causing the paper to blow so much, I definitely needed to actually step on the canvas to actually keep it on the ground. For number 4, I really worked hard to envision each gesture I wanted so that they weren't accidental but intentional, and I think I was able to accomplish this in the end. And lastly, for number 5, I created a semi-cohesive piece, but the purpose of my works were not to be a statement, but instead for me to practice, examine, and explore the techniques of Pollock. I never really lost touch with the canvas like Pollock did, as he mentioned before, but my purpose and Pollock's purpose are completely different when using the techniques of action painting. In the end, I felt like I was really able to explore action painting and use these techniques to the best of my ability. I felt like I was really able to explore action painting and use these techniques to the best of my non-painterly ability. But a funny thing that occurred was when I would show what I did to other people. And they would immediately say, "Oh, that looks like a Pollock, really great job." And even after I told them it wasn't intentional, they kept saying, "Oh, it looks like a Pollock, great job." And when I look at my works and when I look at Pollock's works, I know that they don't even compare. Even when I tried to use, for the best of my abilities, Pollock's techniques, I'm still not able to create a Jackson Pollock. And at the end of the day, that wasn't my purpose of the exploration at all. I was not trying to make a Pollock. I was trying to use his techniques, and his vision with using his techniques is different than what I'm doing with using his techniques. if that makes any sense. It's just interesting that even though action painting was used by other artists like de Kooning, Pollock, at the end of the day, is always going to stand the test of time for his innovative techniques. I think that Pollock, I'm sorry to say, for de Kooning and other artists, I think Pollock is really going to be the known person at the end of the day for abstraction and for action painting. And that's why when you go on Wikipedia, that's the first thing that pops up for either action painting or Jackson Pollock. And when you go on YouTube, when you search action painting, you get Jackson Pollock documentaries, and you get people trying to say that they're making Jackson Pollocks. And at the end of the day, I think that's really cool that Jackson Pollock was able to innovate and was able to create a new style for a new era.